Lead, sticking with politics in this 100 days of Trumpitude week. Lots to talk about with my panel. And let me start with you, Alice, because I want to ask you, back in 2012, then citizen Trump tweeted, quote, "Why is Barack Obama constantly issuing executive orders that are major power grabs of authority?" But now we know, 95 or whatever days it is into his presidency, he signed more executive orders in his first 100 days than any commander-in-chief since Harry S. Truman.
Yeah, what a difference 5 years makes, right? Look, I will say this. Some of the executive orders have been positive, advancing his policies with regard to withdrawing from TPP and furthering the Keystone Pipeline and his policies. But in terms of actually making a substantial legislative accomplishment, these really aren't them. And this is, I akin this to Hillary Clinton saying traveling around the world in frequent flyer miles are an accomplishment. That's an activity. And these are activities that further his policies. What we do need to see, and I think we will, is some legislative accomplishments with regard to repealing and replacing Obamacare. I think his tax policy that will be coming out, that should be positive. But these are not necessarily legislative accomplishments. They do help to further his policies, but I wouldn't take it any more than that.
The polls indicate, Michael, that he has the lowest approval rating of any president in modern history at this point in his presidency. But if you dive deeper into the polls, his supporters, his base is still with him. 96% of respondents in a new Washington Post ABC News poll said they support him again. What does that tell you?
I think the rules have changed in politics. I mean, if Hillary Clinton had been elected, she would probably have among the lowest poll approval ratings of any person at this point in the presidency. The country's just more polarized. We know that from 2 presidential elections now in a row. And I think with Trump, he is 4 or 5 points below where he wants to be, where he should be. He said last week that he thinks his base is 45%. He's now at 40%. And that is a perilous place for him to be. But I don't think anybody imagines that he would be where Obama was in the 60s at this point in his presidency.
And Michelle, the president tweeted that the polls that were fake news and that he would still beat Hillary Clinton in the popular vote. Of course, he never beat Hillary Clinton in the popular vote. I have to say, I'm a little surprised he's still tweeting about this stuff. It still really gets to him, his approval ratings and what happened with the popular vote in 2016.
Look, he thought being president was a little bit like winning Miss Universe. If you can get the crown, then everybody needs to be nice to you, and you just get to go around and accept the well-wishers' greetings. It's been hard, and he's had to find this out, and he doesn't let go of anything very easily. So you can expect him to be tweeting about this for a really long time.
Yeah, and interesting, I was off on Friday, but Jim Sciutto did the show, and I was watching it this morning. And it was all about how the White House was planning to introduce health care reform this week, and they were going to finish the 100 days strong with this health care week. Now we're hearing different messages from Reince Priebus and the budget director talking about how it's a marathon, not a sprint. Health care reform doesn't have to pass. Now, this does mean that President Trump, as of now, has 0 major legislative accomplishments. And other presidents usually have 1 or 2. FDR had something like 15. But do you think health care is something that can still happen, whether or not it happens this week?
I do think it will happen. I think the good thing is now they're not putting a timeline on it, which is a positive step. And the fact that the president has indicated he's going back to the drawing board on this. And there was significant progress last week with regard to on the House GOP side. We had the moderates of the Tuesday group and the more conservatives and the House Freedom Caucus come together and have conversations pretty significantly late last week. I'm hearing there's a possibility there may be some actual text in the next day or so, possibly by tomorrow. Whether or not it gets to a vote, I think is a little bit premature to say that something will happen before 100 days. But the good news is that the president and Vice President Pence, they've all indicated they want to follow through on the promises that not just they campaigned and went on, but the members of House in regard to repealing and replacing Obamacare.
And of course, we have this week this big showdown over government funding. Take a listen to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly talking to Dana Bash about the funding of the border wall. President Trump has said that funding needs to be in the government funding bill.
The president has been pretty straightforward about his desire and the need for a border wall. So I would suspect he'll do the right thing for sure, but I will suspect he will be insistent on the funding.
Do Republicans even want this? I read that Republicans who are in the border states like Texas and Arizona, they don't even support this wall.
You know, it's not really clear who's dying for this wall in Congress. And Democrats have made pretty clear that this is a non-starter for them. They won't even have a discussion about this. So the thought is that there'll be some kind of face-saving measure where they talk about additional money for technology. But, you know, the budget chief, Mulvaney, won't even now say for sure that Trump will reject any bill that doesn't have the funding for specifically the wall.
This is straight out of Art of the Deal with Trump. He likes starting negotiations shooting really high, saying 15% is going to be the corporate tax rate, which will put trillions of dollars on the deficit over 10 years. It's basically a non-starter, but he's starting at a point where he can then walk back and cut a deal in a favorable place. I think the border wall, he's also putting it out there before the negotiations really get down there. This is my line. He can walk it back. I think with Obamacare last week, he said, I want to do it in 4 days or 6 days. It's not going to happen, but he's lighting a fire under members of Congress and keeping them moving forward on it.
Speaking of members of Congress, Dana Bash talked to Congressman Darrell Issa from California, who had a tough re-election battle last time. In fact, there was, I think, a recount, and he was one of the last people sworn into office. Take a listen after Dana asked him if he would want President Trump to campaign with him.
Would you want President Trump to come to your district and campaign for you?
I was with Secretary Kelly.
But with the president?
I was with Secretary Kelly, who's one of his great appointments.
Is this going to be a big issue, you think, in 2018? Republicans who don't want Trump to campaign with
I think we saw a little insight into this in the Georgia the CD6 race, where we saw that the people that were really supportive of Trump and had embraced him and were supportive of him, they came in like third, fourth, and fifth. And the Karen Handel, who won on the Republican side, she basically came out and said, look, I'm going to be a consistent conservative in Washington, but I will be a check on Donald Trump. So the ones that are slightly distancing themselves from Trump seem to be doing better. Whether or not that's a sign of things to come after we get some accomplishments under our belt remains to be seen.
It does seem like there are members of his administration, like Mattis and Kelly, are more popular than him among Republican members of Congress.
And the place where this is really going to hit the road is in the midterms. If you have a president who's under 40% in the midterms, that's really bad news for your party, and every one of that hits every district, not just the purple districts, and that means members of your party are going to move away from you. It means you're going to have to stay home. We saw this with other presidents. I mean, we've seen other presidents stay home from campaigning. I remember Bush staying home at the end of his term, and Obama stayed out of many districts as well. So Trump has some time here. He's got a year to pull this together, and maybe someone like Issa in California will come around, but it's not looking good.
I know the interesting issue, though, is, Michelle, that Trump's base would walk across a floor of broken glass for him. But that's not a majority. That's 35-40%.
That's right. I mean, he is correct that basically he could be caught with a dead body and they wouldn't care. But what's making Republicans in Congress very nervous is that loyalty does not necessarily translate in the midterms. The midterms tend to be a referendum on how the president is doing overall. And, and maybe those Trump loyalists are in their district and they'll be backing these guys, but maybe not. And presidents usually have their party lose seats in the midterm. So
fascinating stuff. Thanks one and all for being here. Really appreciate it. Alice Michelle. It's his first official public appearance since leaving the White House, but there's one thing former President Barack Obama did not talk about on stage in Chicago. What was it? Stick around.